Welcome to History by Genius channel. Today we are going to discuss about the taxation system in ancient India. India's economy has been in a very strong position since ancient times. The main reason for this is the geographical condition of this place. The location here has been very beneficial for agriculture, industry, trade and commerce. Due to their development, the economic system of the country also got a lot of strength, as a result of which four-cornered development became possible. As we had discussed earlier, the people felt the need of a king for their protection after the chaos spread in the society. They entered into an agreement with the king, according to which the king promised to protect their lives and property, and the people also promised to contribute to him in the form of taxes. To discharge his duties, the king needed a powerful military organization which would not only protect the kingdom against foreign invasions but also help in establishing internal peace and order. Apart from this, the administration of the state required a large number of ministers, officials, and employees. The people used to rely on the king that the government would do some work for their welfare. To fulfill all these objectives, the king needed money, and he had to get this money from the people, which was collected in the form of taxes. Kautilya also considered finance as an essential part of the seven major organs of the state. Now, we find that since ancient times, India has been an agriculture based country, and the main occupation of people here has generally been associated with agriculture. For this reason, since ancient times, the main source of income of the government has been land revenue. The main reasons for agriculture being the main occupation were: firstly, the number of forests was very high in the beginning. During different periods, the governments started clearing the forests and bringing them under cultivation. Secondly, the land of the country, especially the land in North India, was very fertile from the viewpoint of agriculture. Thirdly, after the discovery of iron, many tools began to be made. These tools were also made for farming, which made this work much easier. And lastly, there was no shortage of water in the country, due to which many facilities were available for irrigation. Now, a question that often arises is, who owned the land? Was it the government, or was there private ownership as well? The Rig Veda indicates that in this period, the owner of arable land was either an individual or a family. But there is no information about whether he had the right to sell or donate land. Pastures were beyond the fields and were considered the property of the entire village. Being the head of the clan, the king was considered the lord of the cultivable land of the village. And in the post-Vedic period, the Aryans had gained full knowledge of the ownership of cultivable land. Probably the person who cleared the bushes and cultivated it was considered the owner of that area of land. From the literature of this period, we also get information that the land was made cultivable by setting fire to the forests or cutting them with axe. After the invention of iron, the Aryans made iron tools for agriculture and used them well. It became easier to clear forests with iron axes and to dig deep with an iron bladed plough. In the post Vedic period, the king had more rights regarding land ownership than in the Rig Vedic period. It is written in the Shatpath Brahmana that if the king donates a portion of the land with the consent of the people or he donates it properly, then it will be considered as a donation. It is mentioned in the Buddhist scripture Sutnipath that a bhikshu, a monk, he has no son, cattle, farm or house. So it is clear from it that the owner of the land was considered to be a special person. It is written in Dignikaya that a Kshatriya protects the field, that is why he is called a Kshatriya. Thus the king's ownership in the land came to be understood. The Abstambh Dharma Sutra informs us that the owner had the right to take a portion of the produce from the farmer and give it to plough his fields. The Kunal Jataka shows that in the republics, the dynasties were generally the lords of all cultivable land. This land was managed by their servants, bhojaks, amatyas, and sub-kings. They used to do labor from their slaves and maids. So it is clear that in the beginning of this period, most of the land was considered to be the property of the entire village residents. Brahman landlords are mentioned in Abstambh. Perhaps these were the persons to whom the king gave a large area of land as gifts or donations. From the Dignikaya and the Madhyam Nikaya, it appears that many of these Brahmins gave up the semi-spiritual life and took to collecting land. By the time of the Mauryas, agriculture was highly developed in India. Cultivable land in this period can be divided into three parts from the point of view of ownership. So these are the king's land, individual land, and the village land. In the second chapter of Arthashastra, Kautilya has written that the king has full right to settle the land which has not been cultivated till now. It is clear from this that the lord of such a land used to be a king. Similarly, the king contributed significantly in improving the rural economy by settling the Shudras outside the villages. The land, which was heedless, also came under the authority of the king. Kautilya also wrote that if there was a dispute between two families over a piece of land and the elders of the village were unable to decide it, then such land would also come under the authority of the king. Kautilya also mentions the fact that the king used to give some portion of land to the collectors of land revenue, but these people could not sell the land. So it is clear from it that the king used to give this share from the same land of which he himself was the owner. And in the third chapter of Arthashastra, Kautilya mentions that the lord of the land could give his land to another person by taking some rent. But so far as the sale of land is concerned, it could be sold only to relatives. It also means that generally the land could not be sold to a resident of another village. So it is clear that the ownership of land was individual, but the land which was not owned by an individual came under the king. Apart from this, pastures were considered to be the common land of the village. So now we will talk about the rate of revenue. So what was the rate of revenue in which period? This is a very important question based on the sources available. The rate of revenue can be estimated at different times. So first of all, we will talk about the Indus Valley civilization. So the Indus Valley civilization was the ancient civilization of our history. In this period, the main occupation of the people was agriculture. But we are unable to get any information from the sources related to this period. The reason for this is that no one has been able to read the script of this period so far. The archaeological sources of this period also do not give any information about it. Consequently, nothing can be said with certainty about the taxation system and the machinery of its collection in this period, though its existence cannot be denied. Dr. Owen Tripathi believes that community life in that era would not have been possible if people were not willing to contribute. Therefore, it can be assumed that there must have been some kind of tax system in that period according to which people would have contributed individually or collectively towards the city state. So, during this period, there must have been some sort of taxation system, but what was the rate, how it was collected, which agencies collected it is not known because of the lack of sources. Secondly, during the Rigvedic period, Aryans are considered as a nomadic race after coming to India, but after settling here, they started leading a permanent life and made agriculture their occupation. Agriculture was in its infancy at that time. They divided the land into two classes, Urvara and Khilya. Urvara was fertile land. It was considered the personal property of the family, while the Khilya land was used for cattle grazing. In this period, the king did not collect any fixed tax, but to run the affairs of the administration, the people used to contribute to him, which was called Bali Hirith. It is mentioned in many scriptures, including the Rig Veda. This was probably the king's share of the produce. Revenue was paid in the form of produce only. But during the later Vedic period, people had to pay this tax, that's Bali, compulsorily. By this time, an official had also been appointed by the king who would determine the king's share of the produce. Many officials were associated with the collection of this tax. Bhagdu determined the king's share in the produce. The officer who collected the tax was called Sangrahitra. The importance of revenue and these officials in the administration is evident from the fact that in this period the king's ministers, who were called Ratnins, also included them. These two officers worked in collaboration with each other and not independently. But here it must also be recognized that this was the formative phase of the taxation system in ancient India. Then about the epic and the sutra ages. This system developed a lot in the epic and sutra period. Based on contemporary sources, it can be said that the king's share of the produce depended on the nature of the crop, its price, market conditions, and local factors. Although the rate of revenue was usually one-sixth, but many times the king and his officials also extorted more from the farmers. With reference to the Jatak texts, the name of an officer named Raju Gahak is found in this period. He measured the field with the help of a rope. He took special care that the interests of the king or the peasants were not harmed. On the basis of Taittiriya Samhita, it can be said that till this period people knew how to sow crops according to the weather. The crop which was sown in winter was harvested in summer. Paddy was sown in the rainy season and harvested in the winter. In the Sutra period, the names of Ganikas and Karmic officers are found. Ganika was the superintendent of accounts, while Karmik was the clerk. They are also mentioned in the descriptions of Kautilya and Panini. In the Mahabharata, it is said that the king should use the taxes collected from the subjects for their protection. Otherwise, he would share a quarter of the sins committed by the subjects. A king who used this money for his personal luxuries and not for the protection and welfare of the subjects is described as a bandit. In the Shanti Parva, it has even been said that if the property of the subject is stolen, he can also claim for the recovery of the loss. Dr. K.P. Jaiswal has written that when the king fails to fulfill his duty, the loyalty of the people towards him also ends, and they have to choose a new ruler. The Nanda rulers greatly improved the economy of the state, although their attitude towards the people remained very oppressive. However, the tax system they created was adopted by the Mauryas to a great extent. According to Dr. Tripathi, there is reason to believe that behind the glory and power of the Mauryas lay the legacy of the framework of administration and a fairly developed financial system left by the Nanda rulers. The Mauryas had only to streamline the administrative and financial machinery inherited by them from the Nandas to reach the pinnacle of glory. Now the Mauryan age. In the Mauryan period, the consolidation of administration can be seen in every field. Chandragupta Maurya's Prime Minister Kautilya was instrumental in organizing the administrative system. Agriculture developed a lot under him. During this period, the land was divided into two parts. One that belonged to the state. The income derived from this to the state was called Sita. The land that was not under the jurisdiction of the state was called Bhag. Kautilya has given the rate of revenue as 1/6. The farmer could pay the revenue in cash or in kind according to his convenience. The government used to provide various means of irrigation to the farmers like canals, lakes, dams, wells, etc. From the available sources, it appears that the government used to charge the farmers separately, which was probably a quarter for using these tools. Pushigupta, the governor of Saurashtra during Chandragupta's time, constructed the Sudarshan Lake. Many facilities were provided to farmers during natural calamities. Although the rate of levy was fixed at 1/6 to 1/4 of the total produce. Additional tax could also be levied from the farmers in times of any kind of calamity or foreign invasion. Here, it is important to keep in mind the fact that the government had strict control over the farmers, and if any farmer was negligent in his duties, he had to be fined. This is also confirmed by Ashoka's inscriptions. Now we will talk about the rent-free lands. The government had also kept a lot of land rent-free. This land was mostly given to the Brahmins. They were also exempted from the tax that was levied on the farmers during the disasters. Consequently, as seen from the Dig Nikaya and Madhyam Nikaya, many Brahmins abandoned their spiritual work and engaged in land accumulation. But it was important for Brahmins that they could sell their land only to those who had already got such land. If they did not do this, they were fined heavily. Besides, the king could reduce the rate of revenue if he wished. For example, Ashoka's Rumindai pillar inscription reveals that he reduced the rate of revenue at Lumbini to 1/8, as he considered the place where Mahatma Buddha was born sacred. Now about the revenue officials. An official named Sita Dhyaksha looked after the government land. From Kautilya's account it appears that this official used to collect seeds of various kinds, and when the land was ready, these seeds were sown. He also used to make necessary tools for farming available to the farmers for the land under him. His other major functions were buying and selling of grain, exchanging one type of grain for another, lending grain on interest, calling for collection of grain in times of need, etc. Revenue was collected only in the government warehouse. It was his responsibility to see to it that there was no loss of government share. Apart from the Sita Adhyaksh, many other officials were connected with the revenue administration. Some of them were prominent as Raju Gahak Amatya, Gam Bhojak, Rajkamik, Niyukt, Akasi, etc. Panini mentions Kshetrakar, whose job was to survey the cultivable land and divide it into plots after plowing. The surveyor used to measure the land with a rope. He used to have many other workers with him for this work. Gam Bhojak used to determine the grain and keep it in the government warehouse. Many scholars consider Gam Bhojak to be a magistrate who was also sometimes responsible for collecting taxes. The government made this rule that the crop could not be bought directly from the farmer, but its sale was possible only at a certain place. Perhaps its purpose was to prevent theft of produce. On the basis of contemporary sources, it can be said that firstly, the cultivable land was measured and later the rent was determined. But sometimes the fixation was done along with the measurement. To collect the tax, the government had maintained the principle that it should bring maximum benefit to the government treasury without being oppressive to the farmers. But in many cases, it remained only in theory. Kautilya even advised that the king should evict the farmer who did not grow crops in his field. In this way, the farmers always had the fear that if for some reason they could not grow the crop, then they would be evicted from the land which they had made cultivable with great effort and at their own expenses. It is also necessary to clarify here that the farmers who had the barren land cultivable kept that land as long as he cultivated it. But if he stopped farming, the king could take this land from him and give it to another farmer. Now, we will talk about the revenue system during the post-Mauryan age. The Mauryans were succeeded by the Shungas, Kanvas, Parthians, Shakas, and the Kushanas respectively. However, they continued with the taxation policy of the Mauryans. From the Junagadh inscription of Rudradaman, the Shaka chief of Saurashtra, that he levied only Bali, Bhag and Shulk taxes from his subjects. However, he did not levy the Vishti, that's the forcible labor, Kar and Pranay. Pranay is the tax that was imposed at the time of some difficulties. During the Gupta age, the land revenue continued to be the chief source of the state income. Normally, the rate of revenue was one-sixth of the total produce. From the contemporary sources, we find that the government received three kinds of taxes from the peasants. These were the kar, which was a tax which the rural people had to pay from time to time. Revenue was called bhag. Bhag was what the government received on daily basis from flowers, fruit and grass. Moreover, the rural people used to pay one-tenth of the produce to the herdsmen as their income. During the age of Harsha, the traditional rate of revenue, that was one-sixth of the total produce, was carried on. It was called Bhag. This rate was fixed on the fertile land. On land which was less fertile, the rate of revenue was one-tenth and one-eighth according to its fertility. After the death of Harsha, the Vardhan dynasty also came to an end. It created a political vacuum in the North Indian politics. Gradually, the entire North India came under the fold of the Rajputs, who established their states. Normally, they adopted the taxation system which had been adopted by uh, since the ancient times. As the Rajput politics was based on feudalism, they gave more stress on the agriculture. The rate of revenue was normally one-sixth of the produce and was called bhag. Bhog was also a kind of tax that was received on flowers, fruit, fuel, etc. We also get reference of a tax that's a hiranya from certain sources. It was probably a tax received from the entire population of the villages in the western India. Taxes named Uparik and Udranga were received. Probably these were additional taxes which were hated by the people. From the accounts of the Pratiharas, we know of a tax, Khal Bhiksha. It was probably fixed on granaries. Dr. Romila Thapar says that each village produced as much grain as was required by that village because they knew that how much grain they produced would ultimately go to the landlords. The feudal lords also spent much of their wealth in the construction of their palaces and temples. Consequently, no effort was made for the growth of trade and industry. And lastly, we talk about the relationship between the government and peasants. So, as we have mentioned, land revenue was the main source of tax for the governments in the ancient periods, due to which the attitude of the governments towards the farmers was tough on many occasions. But it is not the case that the governments adopted a policy of indifference towards the farmers. During natural outbreaks, governments used to help farmers more and more. Efforts were made to provide them with complete facilities for irrigation. In case of crop failure, their revenue was waived, and on many occasions they were given help to bring in new seeds. On the whole, the relationship between farmers and governments in ancient times was very cordial. In general, all the rulers kept the interest of farmers in mind because they knew that they were the main source of income of their state. So there is no doubt that some officials continued to exploit the farmers. So this was all about the agrarian system of taxation in ancient time. So hoping that you would have liked this channel, this lecture. So it's my request to like and subscribe this channel. So those who haven't subscribed it so far, they should subscribe it and share it to their friends so that they can also take more help and benefit from this type of lectures. So if you have any queries, so you can go to the comment box and give your comments also. So thank you very much.